I thought my dedication and hard work would be enough, but little did I know, my boss had other plans. My name is Rachel. I'm 32 years old, and I've been a nurse for nearly a decade. I've always taken pride in my work, going above and beyond to ensure my patients receive the best care possible. I've worked tirelessly to build a reputation as a compassionate and skilled nurse, and my colleagues have come to respect me for it. But despite my hard work and dedication, I found myself facing a harsh reality. My boss, the person I thought I could trust, had been secretly sabotaging my career. I remember the day I found out like it was yesterday. I was sitting in my office, staring at a report my boss had submitted to the hospital administration, and I noticed something that made my blood boil. My work, my ideas, my suggestions had all been presented as her own. I felt a mix of emotions: shock, anger, betrayal. How could she do this to me? I thought we had a good working relationship. I thought she valued me as a member of the team. But it turns out I was just a pawn in her game of office politics. I couldn't believe it. I had given my all to this job, and this is how I was being treated. I started to wonder, had she been doing this to me for a long time? Was this why I hadn't gotten the promotions I deserved? The more I thought about it, the more I realized that I had to take action. I'd been a nurse for nearly a decade, and every day still felt like a new challenge. I worked on the pediatric ward, surrounded by tiny patients who relied on me for care. My colleagues often joked that I had a gift for soothing frightened children, and I took pride in being able to calm them down when they were scared or in pain. I loved my job, not just for the technical aspects of nursing, but for the human connection I got to make with my patients and their families. One little boy in particular stood out to me. Let's call him Timmy. Timmy was 7 years old, and he'd been in the hospital for weeks, undergoing treatment for a serious illness. His parents were always by his side, worried sick about their little boy. I did everything I could to help Timmy feel better, from administering medication to playing games with him when he was feeling up to it. His parents were grateful for the care I provided, and it meant the world to me to see Timmy's face light up when he was happy. It was moments like those that reminded me why I became a nurse in the first place, to make a difference in people's lives. But despite my passion for my work, I was about to face a challenge that would test my resolve like never before. I worked on a busy hospital ward, surrounded by colleagues who were just as dedicated as I was. We all worked together to care for our patients, often relying on each other for support and guidance. My colleagues were a mix of experienced nurses and newer staff members, and I enjoyed mentoring some of the younger nurses. Our ward was led by a seasoned nurse manager who had years of experience in the field. She was known for being tough but fair, and I respected her leadership. However, there was one person on our team who stood out, my supervisor, who seemed to take credit for others' ideas and had a tendency to undermine her colleagues. At first, I brushed it off as minor office politics, but as time went on, I started to notice a pattern. She would often take credit for my suggestions in meetings, and when I tried to speak up, she would interrupt me or talk over me. I tried to brush it off, thinking maybe I was just being too sensitive, but the behavior continued. One day, I presented an idea for improving patient care to our team, and she presented it as her own in a meeting with hospital administrators. I felt a surge of frustration, but I didn't say anything, thinking that maybe I was just overreacting. But the incident stuck with me, and I started to wonder if this was more than just a minor issue. I started to notice that my supervisor was playing favorites. She would give certain nurses more desirable assignments and praise them in front of others. One nurse in particular, a younger woman named Emma, seemed to be her pet. Emma would often show up late or leave early, but my supervisor would always make excuses for her. Meanwhile, I was consistently working long hours and taking on extra shifts, but my supervisor rarely acknowledged my efforts. When I asked for feedback on my performance, she would brush me off, saying I was doing fine. But when Emma made mistakes, she would downplay them and offer support. I, on the other hand, was held to a different standard. I started to feel like I was being singled out, like my supervisor had it out for me. I tried to shake off the feeling, telling myself I was being paranoid. But the more I thought about it, the more I realized that something wasn't right. One day, I overheard my supervisor praising Emma's work to another colleague. "Emma is such a valuable member of our team," she said. I felt a pang of frustration. Why wasn't I being recognized for my hard work? Why was Emma getting special treatment? I didn't know the answer, but I knew I had to do something. I was sitting at my desk, reviewing a report I had spent hours working on. It was a proposal for a new patient care program, one that I was sure would make a big difference in our hospital. As I was going over the final details, I saw an email from my boss to the hospital administrators. My heart sank as I read the email, my eyes scanning the words. My boss was presenting my proposal as her own, without even mentioning my name. I felt a rush of anger and betrayal. How could she do this to me? I had worked hard on that proposal, pouring my heart and soul into it. I thought about all the times I had shared my ideas with her, all the times I had trusted her guidance. It seemed like she had been using me all along, taking my ideas and presenting them as her own. I couldn't believe it. I took a deep breath and decided to confront her about it. I walked to her office, my proposal in hand, and knocked on the door. "Come in," she said, looking up from her computer. I walked in and closed the door behind me. "We need to talk," I said, my voice firm. After the incident with the proposal, I noticed that my boss's behavior towards me changed. She would often undermine my decisions in front of my colleagues and question my competence in meetings. She started to spread rumors about me, telling others that I was difficult to work with. I tried to brush it off, but it was hard to ignore the whispers and side glances from my coworkers. One day, I was assigned to lead a project that I had been working on for months. I had put together a team, and we were making good progress. But just as we were about to present our findings to the hospital administrators, my boss stepped in and took over the presentation. She presented our work as her own and barely mentioned my name. I was furious. I knew that I had to do something, but I wasn't sure what. I started to document every incident, every snide comment, every instance of sabotage. I knew that I needed evidence if I was going to take action, but the more I documented, the more I realized that my boss's behavior was not just about me. It was about a pattern of behavior that was affecting the entire team, and I knew that I had to do something about it. I walked into my boss's office, my heart racing with anticipation. I had been preparing for this moment for a long time, gathering evidence and rehearsing my words. "Can I talk to you about something?" I asked, trying to keep my tone neutral. She looked up from her computer, a hint of annoyance in her expression. "What is it?" she asked, her voice curt. I took a deep breath and dove right in. "I've noticed that you've been taking credit for my work and undermining me in front of my colleagues. I'd like to know why you're doing this." She leaned back in her chair, a look of surprise on her face. "I don't know what you're talking about," she said, her voice dripping with insincerity. I pulled out a folder filled with documents and evidence. "I have proof," I said, my voice firm. "You've been presenting my ideas as your own and sabotaging my projects. I want to know why." She shifted uncomfortably in her seat, her eyes darting back and forth. "I don't know what kind of game you're playing," she said, "but I assure you it's not personal." "It's personal to me," I said, my voice rising. "I'm tired of being treated unfairly. I deserve respect and recognition for my work." She leaned forward, her eyes narrowing. "You're being dramatic," she said. "You're not as important as you think you are." I felt a surge of anger, but I kept my cool. "I'm not being dramatic," I said. "I'm standing up for myself, and I won't let you bully me anymore." I trudged through the hospital doors, my feet heavy with exhaustion. It had been months since I'd confronted my boss, and things had only gotten worse. She'd continued to undermine me at every turn, and I'd started to doubt my own abilities. I'd applied for promotions, but she'd blocked them. I'd tried to speak up in meetings, but she'd shut me down. I felt like I was hitting a brick wall at every turn. As I walked to the nurses' station, I saw my boss talking to one of my colleagues. They were laughing and chatting, and I felt a pang of resentment. Why couldn't I be happy and carefree like them? Why did I always have to feel like I was fighting an uphill battle? I clocked in and started my shift, going through the motions. But I couldn't shake the feeling of defeat that had been building inside me. I felt like I was losing myself in this job, like I was just a shadow of the nurse I used to be. As the day wore on, I made mistake after mistake. I administered the wrong medication to a patient and had to spend hours rectifying the situation. My boss was furious and called me into her office for a lecture. "You're not performing up to par," she said, her voice cold. "Maybe this job is just too much for you." I felt tears pricking at the corners of my eyes, but I refused to cry. Instead, I nodded, feeling defeated. Maybe she was right. Maybe I wasn't good enough. I left her office, feeling like I was at a low point in my career. I didn't know how much more of this I could take. I sat in my small apartment, staring at the wall as I replayed the events of the past few months in my head. My boss's betrayal, the sabotage, the humiliation. I thought about all the times I'd been belittled and marginalized, and I felt a surge of determination. I was tired of being a victim. I was tired of being pushed around. I decided then and there that I was going to take matters into my own hands. I was going to plot my revenge against my boss, and I was going to make sure she paid for what she'd done to me. I started brainstorming, thinking about all the ways I could expose her and bring her down. I thought about gathering evidence, documenting every instance of her sabotage and manipulation. I thought about talking to HR, about filing a complaint, and taking my case to the hospital administration. But then I thought about something more, something that would really hurt her. I started to formulate a plan that would take time and effort, but would be worth it in the end. I would gather evidence, build a case, and then I would strike. I would show her that she couldn't push me around and get away with it. I would show her that I wasn't a pushover. I would make her regret the day she ever crossed me. I spent the next few days gathering evidence, documenting every instance of my boss's sabotage and manipulation. I saved emails, recorded conversations, and took notes on her behavior. I built a file, a comprehensive record of everything she'd done to me. I also started to talk to my colleagues, discreetly asking if they'd noticed anything unusual. Some of them were hesitant to talk, but others were more than willing to share their own experiences with my boss. One colleague told me about a project she'd sabotaged, another about a meeting she'd hijacked. I listened, taking it all in, and adding it to my growing file. As I gathered more evidence, my plan started to take shape. I would present my findings to the hospital administration and let them deal with my boss. I would show them the emails, the recordings, and the testimony of my colleagues. I would make sure they understood the extent of her sabotage and the impact it had on me and the hospital. I spent hours rehearsing my presentation, perfecting my delivery, and anticipating questions. I knew it wouldn't be easy, but I was determined to see it through. I was going to bring my boss down, and I was going to make sure she never sabotaged anyone again. I walked into the hospital administrator's office, my boss sitting across from her. I took a deep breath and began to speak. "I'd like to discuss the treatment I've received from my supervisor," I said, my voice steady. "I've been subjected to sabotage and unfair treatment, and I'd like to present evidence to support my claims." The administrator looked at me, her expression serious. "Please go ahead," she said. I pulled out my file and began to present my case. I showed her the emails, the recordings, and the testimony of my colleagues. I explained how my boss had taken credit for my work, undermined me in front of my colleagues, and blocked my promotions. My boss tried to interrupt, but I kept going. I presented every piece of evidence I had, and I made sure the administrator understood the extent of the sabotage. When I finished, the administrator looked at my boss. "Can you explain any of this?" she asked. My boss stumbled over her words, trying to come up with excuses, but the administrator wasn't having it. "I think we need to take a closer look at this situation," she said. "I'll launch an investigation and we'll get to the bottom of this." I felt a sense of satisfaction, knowing that my boss was finally going to be held accountable. The administrator turned to me. "Thank you for coming forward," she said. "We'll do everything we can to support you." I stood up, feeling a sense of relief. It was time for my boss to face the consequences of her actions. The investigation was launched, and the hospital administration took swift action. My boss was stripped of her supervisory role and given a formal warning. The news spread quickly through the hospital, and many of my colleagues came up to me to apologize for not speaking out sooner. Some of them thanked me for my bravery, while others expressed concern about the potential backlash. I tried to stay professional, but it was clear that the situation had created tension. The hospital administration offered me counseling and support to deal with the stress and anxiety I had experienced. I accepted their offer and started attending therapy sessions. The therapist helped me to process my emotions and develop coping strategies. As time passed, the hospital started to implement new policies to prevent similar situations in the future. They introduced training programs to promote a positive work environment and encourage employees to speak up if they witnessed any wrongdoing. I felt a sense of satisfaction knowing that my actions had led to positive change. However, I also knew that the road to recovery would be long and challenging. I had to rebuild my confidence and learn to trust my colleagues again. I decided to take on a new role within the hospital, one that would allow me to make a positive impact and help others. I started working with the hospital's training department, developing programs to support new nurses and help them navigate the workplace. It was a challenging but rewarding experience, and I felt proud to be making a difference. As I looked back on the experience, I realized that it had taught me a valuable lesson. I had learned that standing up for myself and others was important, but it was equally important to take care of myself in the process. I was determined to move forward, using my experience to help others and create a more positive work environment. I sat in my new office, surrounded by the quiet hum of computers and the occasional beep of a monitor. It had been months since I'd exposed my boss's sabotage, and I'd been reflecting on the experience a lot lately. I thought about the lessons I'd learned, the mistakes I'd made, and the opportunities I'd seized. I realized that I'd grown a lot as a person, that I'd developed a thicker skin and a stronger voice. I'd learned to stand up for myself, to speak out when I saw injustice, and to support others who were going through similar struggles. I thought about the colleagues who'd thanked me for my bravery, and the ones who'd been inspired to speak out themselves. I thought about the hospital's new policies and the training programs that were helping to create a more positive work environment. I knew that I couldn't change the past, but I could use it to shape the future. I could use my experience to help others, to mentor them, and to support them. I leaned back in my chair, feeling a sense of purpose. I knew that I still had a lot to learn, but I was ready for the challenge. I was ready to move forward, to grow, and to make a difference. I picked up my pen and started writing, jotting down notes and ideas for my next project. I was excited to see where this new chapter would take me. I've learned that standing up for yourself and others is crucial in any workplace. It's not always easy, and it's not always popular, but it's necessary. When you see injustice, don't ignore it. Speak out, even if it's just a whisper at first. Because if you're brave enough to stand up, others will follow. Don't let fear hold you back. Don't let anyone make you feel like your voice doesn't matter. Because it does matter. Every voice matters. And if you're going through a tough time, don't give up. Keep pushing forward. even when it feels like the system is against you. Because in the end, it's not about winning or losing, it's about doing what's right. And if you can take one thing away from my story, it's this: your voice is powerful, and you should use it. I've often wondered what would have happened if I hadn't spoken up, if I'd stayed silent and let the injustice continue. Would things have changed? Would someone else have come forward? Or would the status quo have remained the same? I'll never know the answer to those questions, but I do know this: when we choose to speak out, when we choose to stand up for what's right, we create a ripple effect. We inspire others to do the same, and together, we can create real change. So, I leave you with this. What will you do when you see injustice? Will you speak up, or will you stay silent? The choice is yours, but know that your voice has the power to change the world, one word at a time. Thank you for listening to my story. If you like this type of stories, kindly like this video, share it, and subscribe to the channel for more stories like this. Thank you.